for this Ready to Teach Week session. This session is on generative AI in teaching and learning. We will be recording. I believe the recording has just started. Thank you, Dom. Dom and I will sort of be splitting the duties between ourselves. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship on the lands of which the lands we meet on. We pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. And I would like to recognise their valuable contributions to Australia and global society. We've got a few things to cover this afternoon. Yes, it is the afternoon. Sorry, I'm losing track of my day already. Hopefully we can get through it all in our tight timeline. Please feel free to use the chat, interact. Dom and I will keep an eye on the chat and answer any questions. We'll also do our best to sort of provide any links throughout the session as we can into the chat, but we will also make the slides available afterwards so you can sort of go through them at your own pace. And I'll hand it over to Dom for this picture.
So what I wanted to start with was looking at the engine of a car, because I wanted to start an analogy and the story starts here. And I also wanted some interaction. So could I get anyone who could identify where you'd find the alternator in this picture to give me what sort of reaction? A thumbs up or a tick. Do we have any car enthusiasts here? Do we have someone who has changed an alternator, moved things about? Can I get a cross from people who haven't then? So under your reactions, under Zoom, there's little crosses. Okay, there are people alive. This is great. This makes me feel better. Thank you so much for responding. So I'm assuming everyone with a cross uses an alternator on a daily basis. It's how power gets from, electrical power gets from the engine to charge your battery and to run things like the lights and so on within a car. There's a little actual, okay, you probably can't see that, I'm moving things on my screen. There's a pulley labeled on this diagram that points to the alternator. Everyone uses one. You don't really need to know how it works. Let's go to the next slide. And I will hopefully bring this around to something that makes sense. Just like there's a whole heap of things underneath the engine of your car that most of us, I think everyone here, doesn't really know how they work. Some may be able to pull apart, some may be able to point to on a picture. But again, I don't think anyone here would actually be able to build an alternator, would necessarily know exactly how an alternator works or the physics involved. There's a huge number of things underneath something like ChatGPT or any of these generative AI tools that uses or is described by some of the language on the page here. So we have, for a start, this big area of artificial intelligence, the exciting current area around generative AI, where things are being created by the AI. But then underneath that at the moment, we've got things like ChatGPT, which are a large language model, which means an incredible amount of language pumped into these models to be able to predict things and to create text for us. And then a whole heap of other terminology here. I think I can give a reasonable explanation to some of this. I had a chat to a colleague in electrical engineering and computer science this morning who knows far more about these terminologies and what's underlying them than me, and reassured me that it isn't helping him make any more sense of this than anyone else. So I would like to give you comfort that these things matter, that there's a huge amount of research, but a lot like some of the things in your car, you need to know that they're there. You need to know that they're working. And if they're not working for you, or they're feeling a little odd, or they're not giving you the things that you want, it's time to possibly check them, talk to an expert, make sure you understand things and make sure that it's working well for you. I'm gonna, I think, wrap up my little bit of talking around what the terminology and underlying aspects of generative AI is there. I don't know if I've been fulfilling. If anyone would like to talk about these further at another date, very happy to talk about both generative AIs and alternators, although my knowledge of both of them hits limits reasonably quickly. I can help you find out more. All right, Luke.
I like that analogy.
So this one, glad to hear it. So here is a range of popular tools. early on in about January or February, we were trying to keep some Padlets together of the different popular tools that were available, and it felt manageable for a couple of weeks. Then there was a range of APIs open up where people can use these tools to build their own tools on top of them, and the number of tools exploded at a ridiculous rate of thousands of new tools every day. But here's some key ones that we wanted to highlight and make sure that you're aware of. So there's a range of chat tools.
Hello.
Hello, I'm just gonna hit mute on that one. A range of popular tools available. There's a big group that run just on text. So they're predominantly about putting text in, getting text out. They're getting a little bit more multimodal, but that's where they're mainly focused. ChatGPT is one of the leading ones in this space. That's the one that most people talk about. In some ways, it underpins Bing Chat. Google Bard came a little bit later to the party. Again, it's a chat-based one, a bit more connected to the internet. We're going to play today with Perplexity a little bit. Luke and I really like it because it's really easy to get involved in and start without having to create logins and passwords and things like that. But underneath, it uses ChatGPT's model. There's a whole heap of things that create images as well as audio, music, just about whatever you can point at. Now people are working on creating a generative AI tool to get you to use it.
Yeah, so as Dom said, we're going to use it. We're going to use a couple today. Yeah, as you can see, ChatGPT is there, but we're not going to do a lot with ChatGPT because I think it sort of seems to be the one that people hang all of generative AI on because it was the one that sort of broke the news back in January, etc. But there are so many others, and these are the four that sort of we're going to play with or showcase this afternoon. Please feel free to sort of jump in, play with yourself as we're going along, sort of, put things in chat as we're going around. Otherwise, feel free to just sit and follow along. I also encourage anyone to try just one and see if you can get through all the activities or examples just using one. I'm going to jump across a few of them as we go along. I wrote a quick summary sort of the four that I'm just going to put in the chat, but it's sort of, as Dom said, Perplexity seems to be the easiest to get started with, the easiest to jump into to start interacting with generative AI. So if you're someone who sort of has just been reading the news, hasn't really had the time to sort of sit down and dig into it a bit, there's all like account creation and setups and whatever else. Perplexity, you don't need an account. You basically just go to the URL that I've just put, that Dom and I've just put in the chat, and you can start using generative AI. It's as simple as that. I'm going to do a bit with Microsoft Bing. It's the one that I personally have spent the most time with this year. But to be honest, it does require an account and it can be quite temperamental to set up and start using. I find it hit and miss at times just to interact with it. So it is sort of the one with the highest hurdle to get into. Bard is sort of a newer one that I haven't played with a lot, but am becoming more and more impressed. One of the staff that I work with is falling more and more in love with Bard. It is also relatively easy to get started with because you just need a Google account, and most of you, I imagine, have a Google account or several laying around as part of your work. So logging into Google, going to Google Bard, you can start using generative AI. And then ChatGPT does require an account, but is pretty easy to start using once you've got an account as well. I've also included there, before Dom's sort of Perplexity AI, is a URL to an e-learning guide. So it has sort of instructions on how to join, particularly Bing. It has some quite good instructions on how to get started with Bing if you are interested in playing with that a bit more. The first sort of, and I've create a few examples just to try and get an idea of other things you could be using generative AI from, because there's been a sort of lot of emphasis in education, not just tertiary education, around assessments and students using it to sort of write their assessments, their essays, use it as tutoring tools, etc. But there's so many more possibilities with generative AI, especially in sort of your, as professional staff, teaching staff, sort of day to day, that it could be useful. And so I sort of just want to highlight some different examples that aren't necessarily around assessment. They're just, as professional staff, things that we may do every single day, that we can start using generative AI to sort of give us a leg up or get us started, etc. A lot of them are text-based, which is one thing that I personally struggle with. I find it really, really good for getting started with writing. And so that's sort of something here for an icebreaker, is to share with the group sort of an icebreaker about what you wanted to be when you grew up. So what I'm going to do is I am actually going to demonstrate how I can use generative AI to sort of do this icebreaker, where what I wanted to be when I grew up was actually a teacher. So I have Perplexity AI here open on my screen from that URL. I'm not logged in. I haven't signed up. There's a simple answer to any question. I can paste in or start typing my prompt, which was, I wanted to be a teacher when I was growing up. Can you create a story? And I'll paste the prompt in the chat. Can you create a story in the tone of a teacher that outlines why I wanted to be a teacher in less than 100 words? Now, I've said less than 100 words because I don't want an essay. And we'll see what the AI will actually provide me when I hit enter. So it's definitely done more than 100 words, which is a good example, because something to be mindful of, as Dom was saying, is if something doesn't feel right, check it, etc. And so this is way more than 100 words. I don't need to take this to Word to get a word count of how many words that is. So potentially I need to sort of spend some time in fine tuning that, but I can have a look at sort of even just the first paragraph, and it's a little bit of a story as to why I might have become a teacher. There was a young child with a heart full of curiosity and a thirst for knowledge. This child, let's call them Alex, that's even created a character for me, even though my name's Luke, always found joy in helping others and sharing their knowledge with friends and family. Something that I do. I do like sharing knowledge. That's sort of why I'm doing stuff like this. And as they grew older, realized that their true calling was a teacher. To some extent, I am no longer a teacher, but I once was. But yeah, so it's useful sort of just to create content from scratch, especially for myself. I'm someone who struggles with sort of that blank page syndrome when I'm trying to write something. So I'll paste the story or the first paragraph that my prompt created. I imagine if you did something like, I wanted to be a pirate when I grew up, write me a story in the tone of a pirate, you might get an interesting output.
I got it a little bit wrong.
Diplomat.
I wanted to be a diplomat, but then I did it in the style of Walt Whitman, so I got a bit something more poetic.
Nice. Yeah, Valentina wanted to be a young artist. I think you are an artist, Valentina, but you know, we'll get to that in a few slides. Lorna, veterinarian. Oh, very nice, Lorna.
And I think, well, in some ways, this is kind of a toy example. I think there's also some interesting things about sharing some of the things you wanted to be. Sometimes you learn new things about people. It gives people an opportunity to say things like, well, I wanted to be a unicorn. And for some people, you might be surprised about that. For Shari, I'm sorry, there's no surprise there whatsoever. But it might expose new things about people, enable points to connect, enable you to go, well, this bit's right, this bit's wrong. Gives you something to argue about and to start that discussion. And I think some of that in class can be really powerful, and as a way to get started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So before we move on, could I just check if anyone has had, like, we'd love you to get into Perplexity and play along with us. If you don't want to, we're not going to force you. No one's going to track down wherever you are and be upset. But if you want a hand quickly getting set up or anything, please let me know, and I can work out a way into a breakout group or something else to make sure you're clicking along with us. But just want to give anyone a chance to raise a hand, message me privately, and we can make sure you've got access and things are working for you. But a big part of today, I think, is getting to play and sharing.
Absolutely, Dom. Absolutely.
All right.
Sorry, I'm stuck on Shari wanting to be a unicorn.
And I'm also impressed by the way the unicorn wrote.
Yes, it's a very literate unicorn.
All right.
Another example, besides sort of creating text, and this is something that I find why I use Bing mostly, is I'll take a pause. I find I have to read a lot of things in my day-to-day role, and at times I don't have the time to sit down and actually sort of read in depth. There are definitely documents that I do read in depth, but at times I just want an executive summary. I just want the cliff notes. I just want the takeaway points. And that's where I've found sort of Bing in particular really, really useful. The other AIs can do this, but it gets a little bit more tricky and a little bit less free for my liking to be able to do it. So that's why I sort of find Bing is really, really useful to just get that insights or summaries. So for instance, Bing AI can be used to gather quick insights about a website that you have open. Because it's built into the Edge browser, Microsoft Edge, and I have become a convert since. Previous to this, I was a Firefox user, and then since about March, I've only ever used Edge now because of this Bing AI. But it allows me to get quick insights about a website or content that I have open in my browser. So I'm going to go to a Wikipedia page that is about the history of AI, and I'm going to ask the AI to provide me with a summary. And again, I'm going to try and see if it can give it to me in less than 150 words. So let me quickly navigate to that website. So I have Wikipedia article open here on my page in my browser. As you can see, I am using my Edge. And because I'm using Edge, I have this discover or blue bee icon up in the right-hand side. Now, I didn't even click on that. I just hovered over it and it sort of started doing things already. So by just hovering over that, this sidebar has opened and it's already automatically provided me a page summary of this Wikipedia page. So it tells me that the article explores the history of artificial intelligence from ancient myths and the legends of artificial beings to modern scientific technological achievements. So without even providing it with the can you create a summary, it automatically has done it for me and given me some bullet points about what this page is telling me. Now I can use that sidebar, sort of provide that. Can you create a summary of this page in less than 150 words? It will then, depending on how many people are using it at the moment, start writing in the next second or so, summary that is probably going to be different to the one that's automatically provided. Here's a possible summary. I'm glad that it used that word because I wouldn't fully rely on the fact that it's read it correctly, but it gives me a slightly different summary of that page. Less bullet points, for instance, but is likely less than 150 words or very close to 150 words. What I really like about this feature or this way of using sort of generative AI is it suggests follow-up prompts. It suggests that I ask, what is a Turing test? It asks, well, who are some famous AI researchers? How does AI affect society and ethics? So it's sort of trying to help me explore this page or this topic. I myself may be familiar with the topic already, but just want sort of those more quick insights. So I might ask it to provide me an overview of this page in 5 bullet points, outlining the main takeaways. Again, may take a second or two to start doing that, but I can just start interacting with content, which is what I've found really, really useful is just start asking questions of content, and it will start helping me to flesh out and understand what is on that page. Now, it's quite a long Wikipedia page. I'm scrolling as it's generating its 5 bullet points for me. So for me to sit here and read through this Wikipedia page would take me quite a long time. And if you're anything like me when it comes to Wikipedia, I find myself clicking on the links and going down a bit of a rabbit hole to discover what I'm reading about. Whereas being able to use sort of something like Bing or Generative AI, I can just avoid myself losing lots of time, where it's now giving me these 5 bullet points, where it says the web page traces the history, it shows how AI has emerged, it describes the successes and failures of AI research, it discusses the challenges and limitations, and apparently it also reflects on why it has not yet achieved human level intelligence. So I could say, I can start picking different points that it's bringing me. So if I was further interested in why it hasn't reached human level intelligence, I can ask, and the AI will sort of do its best to summarize that part of the article.
Can I? Sure, I'm interrupting Luke. I'm doing it without permission. I'm not going to ask him. One of the things I love doing with these, and I love watching Luke do, is the interaction. There's, I think I've seen some people put in a prompt, get an answer, and sort of be done and be frustrated they didn't necessarily get what they wanted, or it's not as good as it could be. It's always worth prompting further, digging deeper, and that conversation backwards and forwards. I hate using the word collaboration because I think it implies something a bit more human in AI than what's really there. But that working with an AI to refine and improve and keep stepping through, I think, is what really makes these things powerful. I'm going to throw another thing in chat as well. One of the things I like doing in these sort of places is maybe I go, this is a really lovely bit around artificial intelligence. Do I know it properly? Do I want to do something for students? You can ask, write 5 MCQ questions with feedback for incorrect answers based on this page. If you had a page that you knew was great content that you wanted to give to students, or if you're a student studying this and you want to make sure you know it, those sort of tools can be really powerful too. Also, you go from summaries to tools to help you learn, to help others learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to further sort of hammer home that point, something that I have used it on to bring a little bit more local for us is things like large documents, especially, is that web page going to render properly for me? Out towards the 2032, what's really, really useful, and I'm going to caveat this a little bit and then explain at the end what I mean. You need to be careful with what you're doing this on, the type of content that you're doing what I'm about to do on. But with browsers and the fact that Bing is built into the Edge browser, for open, readily accessible PDF files, you can use the AI to help you digest that content. Now, readily available. Our towards the 2032 document is publicly open, very, very available. I'm putting a little bit of my librarian hat on here and saying you must be very, very mindful of what content you're using this for. But I can sort of open up the PDF, which is 3.8 megabytes. It's a very large PDF, our towards 2032 strategic document. It has a lot of great content in there. If you haven't had the time to read it, you definitely should, but it is a large document. It has very, very dense content inside of it. I can use, because it's built into the browser, this AI to sort of provide me a summary of our strategic document. So for instance, can you provide me a summary of this file that outlines the key outcomes? And so I'm not looking to summarize in this context. I'm now starting to try and understand the content, understand the file. And this leads a little bit more towards what Dom was saying, is that I have done this quite a lot, where I've spent a lot of time sort of exploring and trying to digest large documents to help me get takeaways, to help me find other ways to sort of articulate the takeaways to other staff, etc. So this is providing me a context of the UQ strategic plan for 2022-2025. So it's reading the document for me. It outlines how UQ is going to deliver on public good through the excellence in education, research, and engagement. And here's what I was hoping it would bring up. It's brought up for me every single time I've tested this, but it's identified in the PDF that there are 3 domains and 3 enablers, which is great, because now, as Dom was saying, I can start working with the tool to sort of say, well, tell me more about the 3 domains outlined. Different times I've done this, it's actually put the 3 domains in the first response, but this time it hasn't. But I can sort of ask it, well, what are those 3 domains? And it's quite correctly found that we have in our strategy document a learning and student experience domain. We have a research and innovation domain, and we have a enriching our communities domain. So it has quite accurately found those 3 domains that our strategic document is trying to sort of reach. It also mentioned enablers. So I could ask further about the enablers for these domains, but I might sort of throw it a bit of a curveball here and say, well, what measures of success does this file outline? And see if it can sort of answer a question around measures of success from the strategic file. And as you can see here, it's sort of contextualized it based on my last response or question, where I asked about the 3 domains. And so now it's sort of put those measures of success against each of those 3 domains. And it's outlined that for the learning and student experience domain, some of the measures of success are being number 1 for Queensland graduate employment outcomes, which I know is in the file. I've read it a couple of times. I know that that's mentioned in the file. So it's quite useful in being able to sort of just, again, digest, understand, start interacting with large content, especially if you find yourself a little bit like myself, and Dom and I were both reflecting on this only about an hour ago, being very time poor at times and struggling to keep up with everything that's going on. It can be very, very useful in those scenarios. Anything you want to add there, Dom?
No, I think it's a fun way to explore documents. You can also ask it to compare different PDFs and things at times. I realized when I was looking at that I thought this would be really fun to have a look at the annual reports of all the group of 8 universities, or the strategic plans across the group of 8 universities. And I didn't prepare in time, but even asking something like, can you find the annual reports for the group of 8 universities? It has no trouble with that. It'll give you the PDF listings for each. So if you are looking across things and wanting to digest one PDF or multiple PDFs and explore across, it can do some really powerful things there as well, and save you a lot of time hunting through.
Yeah, and I cannot stress this enough. Please only do this for open PDFs, accessible PDFs. You must still adhere to licensing agreements, etc., for certain content. So just can't stress that enough. Yeah. One thing that sort of we've been playing with a little bit is also, besides text, because there's a big sort of text aspect to generative AI, but it's not the only thing that generative AI can sort of do. As Dom was sort of talking about a little bit earlier, there's image aspects coming out. There's a lot of audio work being done as well in different models and different tools. One that we've had fun with is sort of playing around with, again, Bing to create images. And most of these images that are on these slides have been created using the Bing image creator, where I simply give it a description of an image and it spits out an image for me. So if you're someone who just sort of wants to add some flair to some slides or some questions or some content, it can be really, really good to just sort of get quick images out. Now, by no means perfect.
Yeah. And one of the things I like is sometimes that imperfection can be valuable. So if you ask to generate an image about a particular concept or something that's related to your discipline, sometimes exploring, well, what does it focus on? What does it omit? It can be an interesting place to start a discussion and to, explore things with your students and to explore things with colleagues around, well, why is Luke sleeping in a pile of emails or mail while Jason is looking rather saintly with a cat? So it gives points to start.
Yeah, so that was, yes, Luke was buried in emails when he returned from leave a few weeks back, and that was in the art style of cubism. And Jason wanted to see what a philosopher surrounded by cats looked like. So I will just, oops, sorry, wrong one. So Bing, you can do it from the sidebar as well, but what I generally find myself doing is you can just Google or Bing for the Bing image creator. And again, if you've got an account, you need an account to do it. You can sort of just start giving descriptions of things and it will start to create images. So for instance, I'll try mine again, where I was a tired man buried by email, and I've just added an art style at the end. You don't have to, but it sort of helps get a bit of that creativity juices sort of flowing. I found myself going to digital art all the time because I'm not necessarily the most art inclined, but of course it's going to do this to me now. Should have tested this before. I'm going to quickly fix this by swapping to my other account. And this is what I'm talking about with Bing being temperamental at times. That'll take a second or so to generate, but at a point there. There's completely different images to what I had on the slides. So I get different images at different times. I can add some really, really interesting details to these things. I've seen people sort of talking about, and I'm not a photographer, but if there's any photographers out there, you will sort of potentially understand this a little bit more. But there's things like depicting what sort of lens it might use, or like wide angles, 4K, 8K, HDR. You can start telling it things of what types of lenses to use. For instance, cat in New York Times Square wide angle camera, and it will change the image generation that would have been different from just cat in New York Times Square. So it can be a really quick and easy way just to get content. And that's sort of, there you go, sort of a wide angle lens of a cat in New York Times Square. Can be really useful just to create something that doesn't exist as well. We were having fun with things like a bear walks into a cowboy bar, like just ridiculous things that you can create at any time.
One of the other things I love doing with this, and I posted it into chat, my cat's feeling strong emotions. Some of you may have seen me ask, people, how are you feeling? And a way of testing that, rather than just give me an answer, to pick your favorite cat or pick the cat that best reflects how you're feeling this week or today or coming into things. And it gives people a quick and easy way to go, well, I feel like cat too, and then they can talk about why they feel that way. And sometimes building something that's related to your content, related to what you're doing, can make that more interesting, more relevant for your students, and not having to worry about finding images, copyright images, not the right images, not the same format. I'm also a little terrified by how realistic some of these cats look. And
I don't know.
think at the
I don't
start
think
of the year,
Jennifer's image was realistic enough. I feel like there should be more pain for anyone learning MySQL. But yes, you're right. They can be really.
oh, that's what my
realistic.
cat looked like when learning MySQL. So I feel it's realistic.
But I think that's a really good point, Dom, is that, and that's sort of why I was using them for the slides, because it was sort of like, it can be tiring trying to find free to use images. And so, yeah, it can be really, really useful for that. Is just, I have an image, I have an idea, this is the sort of image I want. But we'll just note for everyone, being mindful of time, it's really bad at text. Do not ask it to make an image that has text inside of it. It just won't do it. It cannot create an image that it has it. I've asked it to be like, hey, create an image where someone's holding a sign and the sign says, you can't do it. It just can't do it. Play with it, experiment, but you'll see what I mean. You get weird and wacky things when you ask it to try and create an image of text. Dom.
Okay, so I love brainstorming with these tools. It's great when I'm hitting a point of going, I'm going to plan a workshop or an activity, and I'm trying to find a way to do something different. What's some creative options for this? What's 4 ways I could approach this problem? I'm trying to send an email to someone, give me some lines about the ways I could do this. And so I have now completely lost where my, there's my buttons. Let me just hide this thing and this thing. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment, just for something different. Okay, so I've put into Perplexity really quickly, provide me 5 ideas for formative assessment for a course on a sociology of education for first-year university students. So this is about giving me some ideas. And it's given me 5 options as requested. It counted appropriately this time. Some of them are okay. Some of them are things that I do, some of them don't, but I think it's a good start. So rather than sitting there with a blank piece of paper or that, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, it gives you a really good place to begin. And then from there, I can refine things, I can improve things. I can also ask for further things like write a rubric with 2 criteria and 4 standards for assessing the concept mapping activity. And this gives me a draft where I can keep, again, interrogating and exploring. Will this give me a good one? Here's some criteria, here's some examples. So that can give me a good basis to start building out that activity and exploring further. I also find myself arguing with these things, saying, actually, I don't really like this one. Can you make this a bit more interactive? Can you add some ideas around how I can make this more engaging, or this approach of teaching, or these type of students? And I think the more information you give it, the closer it's going to be to something that you'll find useful. So can I ask you to go back to trying and play with this prompt of providing activities and throw it into Perplexity or your preferred tool and see what it will give you. I just have to find a Zoom toolbar so I can get back to my chat. So I've got things all over my computer now. I've been playing with different options. There we go. So there's the one I use. Please change it around. Try changing the context. Try giving it a few more hints around maybe what sort of activities you want. Throw it into Perplexity or your favorite one and share some back with us. I'm just going to hit some new shares while we do that. So I did the same thing in chat, and it gave me some overlap, but some very different options. Again, interesting. I think they're both the same backend. And then also tried with Bard, which was more different again, and a different engine underneath, but some similarities, as I said. Okay. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to throw at us, or try some of these in the background? Yep. Great to see Think Pair Share. Exit tickets coming back. All right.
Sorry, Dom, it gave me too much for one message.
Yep, that's okay. All right, I'm going to stop sharing because I know we've got just under 20 minutes to go. If anyone's building these in the background, please post into chat.
Let's me share again. Yep.
Yep.
I'm catching up. I'm here.
All right. Thank you, Lorna.
So,
I like, oh, sorry, look, I'm going to just say for Lorna, noticing that it's picked up the context of the course, picked up in human-centered design and given a very different set. So that contextual awareness of what's the discipline is coming through. Nice. Thank you, Margaret. Awesome.
that's a timely subject, actually. Margaret, I swear I had an email about that yesterday or the day before. Yeah. Along those same lines that Dom was just talking about with assessment, it's sort of, as I was alluding to before, I am someone who struggles with blank page syndrome. I can't get started. I find it very hard to get started writing something, especially if I'm to the end of the week, tired. I lose my words effectively. And that's where I've found generative AI can be very, very useful. As Dom said, if you spend too much time with it, you start arguing with it. But in that first instance, it's really useful just to get something on a page that you can then fine tune, work on, take inspiration from almost. So for instance, an example here is sort of just writing an email. I find myself, especially at the end of the week, having to write out emails to staff and colleagues and whatever else. And I just go, I know what I need to say, but I don't know how to start. I don't know how to put this on a page. So you can use something or any of these tools, but I'm going to use something different. I'm going to use Bard, closing Bing here. I'm going to use Bard. And the reason I'm going to use Bard is because I want to show sort of a feature that not the others don't have, at least that I haven't discovered, is that I'm going to ask Bard here to sort of write an email for me that reminds students that there's an assessment piece coming up or an assessment piece has just been announced or whatever the sort of scenario might be. But I'm going to give it sort of a little bit more context than write an email that tells students an assessment's due. I'm actually going to give it the prompt of or telling the AI, you are a university lecturer that needs to write an email reminding students about an upcoming assignment due date. Can you provide a draft email? I'm not going to go too into depth just right now, but if I was going to do this properly, I would probably give it a little bit more context around what the assignment is, what the course is about, etc. But what it's given me is it's given me things like even a subject line, because that's something that I struggle with as well. Is just I might write an email and then go, well, what do I put as the subject line? So it's even provided me a subject line. It's sort of given me assignment 2.
Luke,
yes.
Do you want to share your screen so we can see this?
Oh, fuck. Thank you. I thought I had. My bad.
That's all right.
Thank you, Dom. Good catch. Had a slide talking about, not that one, email composition. My apologies, everyone. Email composition. Let me start again. Oh, thank you, Dom.
That's all right.
But prompt, university lecturer, writing an email to students reminding them about an assessment. Put in a Bard. It has given me, as I said there, subject line. It's actually giving me a different response than what I had before when I didn't have my screen shared.
Yeah. Which these things will do.
Which is nice to see, maybe a little bit unnice to see. It starts to make itself a little bit humanized, etc. But approaching quickly, apparently this assessment is due on the July 22nd. I might change that to suit my needs, etc. But it's something that I can copy and paste and move into Outlook and then fine tune. But as I was saying, one of the things I like about Bard for this type of things is it actually provides you drafts. And so I didn't get one response to this prompt. I actually got 3. I can look through the 3 and see which one might be best suited. And they're all slightly different, but it helps me sort of just get that draft. Like, it's useful just to get a draft going of something. Now, if I was to use this, I would probably follow up with sort of some more context around the course subject, the assignment type, etc. So I might say, can you rewrite this for a course on modern slavery, using our recent example? And just, I can start working with it and start fine-tuning it even in the app before I sort of take it to Outlook and fine-tune it that way. I might ask it to provide tips to the students on that subject. So it might sort of, I'll be able to say, tell that it's an essay assignment that's due. So it gives tips specifically around essay writing, or it might be a presentation that the students are preparing. So I might ask it to give them tips around presentation creation. But it's just really useful for those moments that I'm sure we all have where we just drained, mind blank, give me some words and I will do the rest. You know what I mean? That get me started and I can fine tune.
Some of the other things I like doing is adding in some extra descriptors. So if you want to be more friendly, more enthusiastic, if you want to encourage students to engage with integrity, if you want to do things like ask, how would a leading expert in psychology rewrite this email to enthuse students? All of those things can help you look at it from different angles and give you some different ideas that might help.
Catching on what Dom just said, and mention academic integrity. And so it's rewritten it, and it's sort of, I'd like to remind you about the university's policy on academic integrity, plagiarism, cheating, other forms of misconduct, etc. So yeah, feeding it, working with it, changing it, different tones. Tone's a good one. Yeah, just working with it, playing with it, seeing what you can get. Some other things is sort of, can you provide those tips? Asking it to be more concise, asking it to be more detailed about certain aspects, like just playing with it effectively. So I've lost my chat since all the share switching over.
That's all right. I've got chat. Keep an eye on that.
This is one that I found interesting recently. A staff member in the library shocked me when they told me they were using ChatGPT, because I sort of hadn't thought about their role and generative AI. We have staff in the library. The library has a lot of printers. Students, they still print. This is still something I'm getting over, that people print. But he has been using ChatGPT with some success to sort of get insights and analysis into how students are printing, how much they're printing, when they're printing, etc. So he gets the numbers from our printing system, paper cut, etc. And he sort of has been working for basically the semester, and he just drip feeds in updates to his printing stats and asks for insights, etc. So he sent me like about 10 pages of sort of his script that he's been doing for 6 months. I won't go into all of it, but this is sort of some of the questions that he was using ChatGPT for, but you could use any of the generative AIs for this sort of thing. So he went into his ChatGPT. Oh no, it's going to ask me to log in. Luke, it's not prepared. Will it remember my password? It might remember my password. That's bad password management by Luke, but if it works, it works. Didn't. Apologies. And now I'm using the wrong keyboard. So this was the prompt that he initially used, was, I'd like you to tell me some info about print totals each week. And he provided what the print numbers were for O week 2023, 25,000, week 1, week 2, week 3. So he provided sort of that initial data. And then he said, I would like percentage increases and decreases each week compared to the prior week. And he was quite surprised because this is something that he gets asked to do, but he hates doing stats, he hates doing reporting, etc. And he was like, oh, wow. It's actually quite accurate. And it explains that the formula that it's using, so I can check it. And so he sort of started playing with it more and more. And so he came back the next week and sort of put in week 5 was such and such total. And his amazement, it picked up that he hadn't provided week 4. So it wouldn't give him week 5's comparison because he hadn't provided week 4. So he provided week 4. And it could pick up, oh, you were trying to find the comparison between week 5 and 4. So here's the comparison between week 5 and 4. And he sort of kept going a little bit. Then he's like, well, it's not the best format. So he sort of, after a few weeks, he's done the whole semester at this point. Give me a comparison increase in a table. And was quite amazed that it was able to sort of do that quite quickly for him and get insights. And he has now gone further and he's asking it insights and giving it notes. He's sort of saying, well, week 13 was a week before exams. Do you think that has sort of had an impact? And he's really been sort of just playing with it as he calls it, data analysis assistant. But he's found it quite useful. And this surprised me because in my experiments with it and numbers, I have found it rather lacking when it comes to numbers. But when I was looking through sort of the work that he's been doing, because it's such a simple sort of formula, etc., it's been quite good. And that he can check the formulas and see and double check that the numbers are correct, he has found quite useful. There's another example, just being mindful of the time, because I know Dom just looked at the time. There's another example of where it could be useful, is just sort of that problem solving or that sort of task-driven type activity.
And I also highlight what Shari threw in chat just a moment ago, where she was saying, again, data analysis, she was talking about emails, all of these things can be valuable things to share with your students. So Shari was saying, this is good for us to help write emails. It can also be a really powerful thing if students are struggling to write emails and find the right way to address things in a positive way, to go, well, here's an example of how I write emails, work with students, demonstrate and share. So let's go on to the tips. And I think the data analysis and a whole heap of other things you can model in the same way of trying these things with your students, showing them to students and working on them together. All right, you go for this first bit, then I want to say something, Luke, and then I think we're getting pretty close to
Fair enough. So we're going to give you some resources at the end of this, and one of them in particular will show you how much this first point really matters, is that the prompt or the sort of the question, the description that you're giving the tool really does make a difference in the results you get. Now, what we've been showcasing today has been sort of some simple ones that are enough to get started. But as you sort of explore it, you will notice the difference. The more details, the more context you can provide it, the much richer and better responses you are going to get from it, the more useful you will find with it. But it's something that there's a million articles out there about, but in my experience, it's something that you sort of just got to take some time and play and experiment and learn what works for you as well. And really just sort of be mindful of that context and that description. And on that, refining your answer, you saw a couple of times, looking at the strategic paper for 2032, just refining it. Oh, great. Thanks for that summary. But really, I'm interested in the measures of success, and sort of working with it to sort of break down or get to the meat of what you're trying to achieve with using the tool is really, really important. So refining your answer and working with it. I can't stress this fourth one enough. These things are changing almost every day, every week. So, oops, sorry, one of my headphones just dropped out. Being mindful that what you get out today or your experience today may be completely different tomorrow, next week. And so just being prepared for that yourself, especially around sort of teaching, etc., is just being mindful that it may change at any time. And yeah, as Don mentioned before, using different tools. So for instance, asking for a draft email in Bard and then taking it to GPT to refine. You'll find you get some interesting results as well.
Oh, let's go to the next slide. I think I'll
sorry.
catch up on slide 19. Sorry, getting ahead of myself.
Oh, good. And so, yeah, along that line of sort of refining your prompts, this is a bit of an example of different responses you would get by just trying different prompt styles or refining or giving that description. You know, you will get a different response if you ask it to write a paragraph about frogs than if you had said, you are a chef, write a paragraph about frogs. You will find you get very different responses. That way you want to jump in, Dom?
I know, keep going.
All right.
I will happily jump in when it's done.
So some wrap up stuff. And again, we're going to make these resources sort of available as well, but just some things to be mindful of. Copyright, the outputs are not protected by copyright. So what you produce, etc., is not necessarily your content. It doesn't qualify for copyright protection. It is not generated by a human. The outputs can actually infringe copyright. We don't necessarily know the underlying sort of training material necessarily. So sometimes just being mindful of where your content has come from. Again, don't upload PDFs, especially from publishers that are available through the libraries, memberships, etc. So for instance, certain journal articles, etc., the library has very strict agreements with these publishers, and it can be in breach if you are passing those PDFs through these tools.
Can I also add uploading any potentially sensitive information or information about students, transcripts of things like that? Just be careful with what you upload and make sure you be sensibly uploading things you'd be happy uploading elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's sort of that privacy thing, is being mindful of what you're giving to it, because you are giving your information or the context to Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, any of these tech companies. So just being mindful of the content that you are giving into it. Don't paste a heap of student information into it, etc. De-anonymize, etc. before you use it. Yeah, just being very, very mindful of the privacy. There's a lot of, well, not a lot, but there's been a few notable cases of staff at big companies such as Samsung, Nvidia, all these tech companies getting into trouble for what they've been putting into the tools. And finally, your outputs should be referenced. The library has a great referencing guide all around generative AI. We've given as much guidance as we can around how to reference outputs, and that's something that you should and can be sharing with your students as well, especially if you're trying to engage your students when it comes to using it for assessments. So being mindful of referencing their outputs. One thing that I've done in my notes is sort of, and something that I try and do myself, is I keep records of the prompts that I used as well. Sort of, it helps me learn, but it also just gives me a bit of a record keeping of what I've done, where I got that image from, what did I put in to get that image or output. So even just keeping track of your prompts can help with your referencing.
Hello, Marit speaking. Good, thanks.
All right. The other thing that I'll also quickly on referencing, having that prompt with the response is also, I think, really important if you get into student assessment. Because if a student prompts, here's my draft that I've written on, can you refine the, spelling, grammar, and so on, and give me a few hints, and it gives an updated version. That's a very different use to, write me 500 words on something. And without that prompt, it can be really hard to know the difference of what's being output as you reference things. All right, let's go to the next slide, Luke, and we can finish this up. So we have, right, I'm going to say, oh, I'm jumping in. I think this was mine. You'll say more in a moment, Luke. We have a range of useful resources across UQ. We have a guide on the Italy website. These links will be available. They will be available in chat in just a moment. So the one from Italy has a range of things that are across the university about general teaching and learning. We have an update each semester that's been just recently updated for semester 2, has guidance around how things should be in ECPs and elsewhere, which is pretty much the same guidance as semester 1. Jason Tangent, who's been doing some incredible work in this space, pushing frontiers around how to create bots that are talking to students, informing his research, all sorts of things, have put together a fairly significant guide, which is the 3rd one there about academic AI. And there's some great guides in the library about artificial intelligence, which are awesome for sending your students to, as well as having a look at yourself as ways that you can talk about artificial intelligence with your students. And I think that brings us to the thank you slide. Luke, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, working with you throughout this. Thank you so much for all the things you shared. Anyone else here who would like to catch up with Luke or myself, we are very happy to talk about this space, and as you may have guessed, excited and contactable. So please feel free to follow up. And Luke, I'll hand over to you to finish.
Thank you, Dom. I've put those links from the slides previously in the chat. We'll make the slides available as part of the Ready to Teach week. Thank you again, everyone. And I would just like to say that if you have sort of enjoyed this session, would hope that there's more sessions like this that you can tell colleagues about, students about, etc. The library is starting to do sort of more of these types of sessions to try and get people engaged and start playing it. They're going to be a little bit more of a sort of a longer format, very more sort of hands-on-y sort of stuff, so we can spend the time playing and teaching and learning off of each other. So feel free to sort of mention those to everyone. But thank you everyone for joining. And we've run over, sorry.